Great, thank you so much, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Craig Richardson, and I'm the president of the Energy and Environment Legal Institute, or E&E Legal. We were probably best known in the last administration for being a judicial watch of sorts against the previous administration in their efforts to essentially take over the energy in this country through the Clean Power Plan in Paris and other things. Under the new administration, I've got a couple of my board members here, Steve Malloy and Greg Walcher. We're trying to be a supportive arm of the agency of this new administration and trying to put energy first. What I'd like to do today is provide a 30,000-foot level of what my colleagues are going to get drilled down a little bit more. And I'm going to have a little fun with this because I'm a PR marketing guy from way back, and I like graphs a little bit, but I also like some clips. And I think we can have some fun at this, but the concept that I'm going to get into is what is virtual signaling, and then look at some marketing things that are going on with the corporations, and I'm going to leave some of this at the feet of the corporations because I think that they are as much to blame for what's going on today. In fact, they're funding a lot of what's going on using environmental groups as sort of the front page. So if I could get the PowerPoint back to the first slide, that would be great. And oh. Okay. Okay, so yes, I already went through all this. So I'm going to go through what is virtue signaling, what's going on with corporations, because historically they've shied away from controversies. Not anymore. They're actually driving it. And is this really fiduciary malpractice and virtue signaling, and what's the real game? So what is virtue signaling? I think it's important to define this up front because we throw a lot of terms around. But of course I went to that incredible source, the Urban Dictionary. Saying you love or hate something to show off what a virtuous person you are instead of actually trying to fix the problem. And I think that's the important thing about virtue signaling, is that the most important thing is you don't do anything about it, okay? And we've seen this for a long time. We see Jesus in the Bible calling out the Pharisees and scribes. He says, they preach, but they do not practice. All their works are performed to be seen. They widen their phylacteries and lengthen their tassels. They love places of honors, at banquets, seats of honors, in synagogues, greetings in marketplaces, and the salutation of rabbi. And we've seen this type of virtue signaling all the way through the religions as we've gone forward. And pious religiosity is where we traditionally saw it. But really in the last 50 years, it's emerged primarily on the left. They've really used this virtue signaling as a way to drive their agenda. And to get a sense of it, of course, I went to the internet again, and I found a guy named James Bartholomew, who's a Brit, who apparently is credited with the term virtue signaling, and it has to be right because I found it on the internet.
These days, many people think that merely expressing an opinion establishes that they really, really care. They use wristbands, hashtags, tweets, ribbons, and t-shirts to show they have fashionably right-on opinions. I call this phenomenon virtue signaling. It's the idea that having and expressing a particular opinion makes you morally superior. But have you noticed something about this kind of virtue? In contrast to Octavia here, it doesn't require actually doing anything. It requires little effort and no sacrifice.
And here are some modern examples. We have the Women's March, and he probably was on a date. That's the only reason why I think he'd be wearing one of those things. But we have the So Sorry That We're White guilt campaign, which I haven't quite gotten my mind around, but that's apparently a bad thing to be these days. And it's not just the left. We have the right here responding to the anthem kneelers, the G.I. Joe in the background, and calling them punk kids, basically. So it can work both ways. We see it on both sides of the same issue. We've got illegal immigrants on one side. They're bridges. They're not bridges. Then we see it on the other side, immigration reform, because your hard-earned tax dollars and the rights and freedoms fought for their blood and sweat of our forefathers should be randomly given to these guys. And of course, climate change and the environment has been a famous one for a long time, and I know we deal with that every day. And then remember, as James Bartholomew noted, the most important thing is of virtual signaling is to appear to do nothing. And I think that's really opened itself up for what should be a takeaway here, and that's humor really does a lot to be able to put the virtue signalers in their place. And one of my favorite guys is George Carlin, and I hope this clip will play.
I'm tired of these self-righteous environmentalists, these white bourgeois liberals who think the only thing wrong with this country is there aren't enough bicycle paths. People trying to make the world safe for their Volvos. Narrow, unenlightened self-interest doesn't impress me.
So that's, I think, a good take on that. The next one I've got here is another clip, and then I won't have very many clips after this, I promise. All right, I think the other clip went away. Anyway, so as I said up front, corporations traditionally shied away from controversy. The controversial issue, which we're seeing pouring out into the streets today, literally on the streets today, is funded a lot of this is by Soros and some of the other people. But corporations traditionally stayed away from hot-button issues. And I spent 7 years of my career at 4 different ad agencies and PR agencies, and it was very simple. It was, you had to stay agnostic, particularly if you're representing business interests, because you didn't want to alienate a particular segment of your market. So you've seen them, they focused on safe issues like Microsoft, Apple did education, clothing companies homelessness, food companies feeding the poor. And we see some examples here, Kellogg feeding children for breakfast. That's an AIDS campaign put together by Nike, and then we have a homeless person here put together by Hanes. Makes sense, right? And then here's a brochure from Microsoft talking about all the things that they're doing for schools. They're teaching code. They're doing things with FIRST Robotics. So they're bringing their technology into schools, and all this makes sense, and it's sort of it's smart marketing. And the green market in particular has really taken off. And when I first got involved in PR in the early '90s, that was the first wave of it. And so it's been going on for a while, and the environmental the companies such as fossil fuels and those who use a lot of electricity sort of grabbed it, and they showed that they're good. You know, even though we're extracting our product, we're good citizens and clean, and it became an important talking point. And even in the BP oil spill, you know, if they spent millions, probably billions of advertising dollars, all about how they're cleaning up and they're taking responsibility. But they're fairly innocuous, and they're not that hard-hitting. And we see examples of that. We've got the ExxonMobil, and the turtle's happy because he's swimming in clean water. And I actually thought that Coca-Cola was kind of cool. I mean, it looks like they actually have plant, you know, in the shape of the Coke bottle. And then we got Dominion Power, which is near where I'm from, and they've got a green campaign. So nothing controversial, really. And then Nike, again, they're cutting waste. They're not putting as much of their product in the system. And then Ziploc, of course, is better for the environment. So let's buy my product. And then this type of green marketing has reached a little bit of a peak in that we see a 2012 Ad Age survey found that while 93% of consumers say have personally changed their behavior, which I think is important, to conserve energy in their household, they're becoming less willing to pay for it. And you see the numbers on the right is that survey, you know, where the numbers are going down between 2008 and 2012 in terms of their willingness to spend more. So the green marketing is sort of tapped out, I think, because people are more responsible. I remember the 70s and all, and you know, people were leaving their trash behind a lot more. And so I think they felt like, oh, okay, I'm doing my part. And then polls reflect this. This is the last from 2001 all the way to 14. You can see that in 07, when it became probably a presidential issue, it peaked at 43, and then now at 14, it's down to 31% of Americans who see the environment as a real issue of concern. But now corporations are driving agenda. In the last decade, something changed. Here's the controversial issue of gay marriage, and you had 379 U.S. major corporations urging the Supreme Court to pass it. You know, again, the rule of Marketing 101 now seems to have changed, and we've got large corporations which should give you a little send-off bells and whistles as to why they're doing this. But large corporations drove that agenda. 2016, one of the big controversial issues was the bathroom law, the controversy in North Carolina. According to the New York Times, by their own numbers, of course they would never print anything inaccurate, but they estimate transgender population at 1.4 million, which is roughly 0.43% of the population. Most people didn't really even know about the issue, yet North Carolina comes along, passes a law to basically keep men out of the ladies' room. And they went ballistic. The media went ballistic. The NBA pulled its game out of Charlotte. Bruce Springsteen canceled his contract, his concerts. PayPal pulled out. So we see something fundamentally going on, and I don't want to necessarily get into the issues. I'm just saying we're seeing something different happening right now. It's being driven by corporations. And then, of course, once North Carolina did what they were supposed to and got back into their doghouse, everything was fine. They rescinded the law, and the NBA game is back in Charlotte. And corporations are even alienating markets that seem to be hugely important. We have Dick's Sporting Good, who has a huge hunting market, is now suddenly on gun control. And we've got Yeti coolers, again, big outdoor market. Suddenly they're ending an affiliation with NRA. And the hunters weren't very happy about it, and this was their response. I won't read it. You can sort of get the gist of what their response was. I'm not going to play this, but this is a video of the two women shooting up Yeti coolers, basically, saying that if Yeti's not with the NRA, we're not with Yeti. And as Americans have started worrying less about the state of the environment, because it's pretty clean, all of a sudden we're seeing more and more doom and gloom, corporations and NGOs jumping on the climate change bandwagon. So this must be the market driving it, right? It can't be, the market must be all in for this. And we see what's going on here with ExxonMobil. We know with the ALEC conference, they're pulling out. Suddenly, we have an interesting thing. Can somebody tell me what the P stands for in the BP? Petroleum. So we have British Petroleum running an ad campaign saying Beyond Petroleum Worldwide. It'd be like Ford Motor Company saying Beyond Motor Cars. Can you envision it? I'm like, well, what message is that sending to your stockholders? And then here's a page from ExxonMobil's climate carbon summary. You can see they're all in Paris. They're supporting Paris. They're into this. This is the George Shultz and those other, whatever you want to call them, Climate Leadership Council, and carbon tax. They're all in, ExxonMobil. And then even the big energy users are all in. Amazon, that's Apple's ad campaign on the right. We got Google with their whatever they do when they're not censoring people. They put their little windmills and stuff. And even the heavy gas or heavy fossil fuel using companies now all going green. Even FedEx uses a lot of green fuel, obviously. I'm not going to play this. So again, humor I think is our best weapon. And I actually wouldn't have known about South Park had I not had two teenagers. And of course I thought I was irreverent and they shouldn't be watching that kind of stuff. And then I was like, that's actually pretty funny. Family Guy as well. I think that's the last. So back here we have, this is again more the example of the corporations, big fossil fuel companies, big energy producers, all in. This is the COP21, and I was at COP21 with some of the guys, and this was the most corporate event I'd ever been in my life. These guys had everything down, and matching logos, and you see who those corporations are. A lot of them are the biggest energy producers or energy users in the world. So why are they doing this if the market's not demanding it? Certainly the market's not. We see climate change. This is a 2014 Gallup poll, down second to last, right above race relations, which is now skyrocketed thanks to Soros and the other groups that are out there. Even 2018 poll, second to last, down there above global trade. So it's not the people aren't demanding this. Chris Hayes put out that essentially it's a rating killer. That's why they're not covering it. So what's the real game? It's now a $1.5 trillion industry, climate change is. These are the sectors of the market, and this is by this Climate Change Business Journal report. So you've got all these sectors that are growing out of this. And this is important to note. Policy or the anticipation of new policy has been one of the biggest drivers of the industry. So you have an industry that's based not on a product, not on a service, not on making people's lives different or better. It's based on policy, which is fine for a room like this, but it's not really sustainable from a capitalist or free market perspective. And the largest, not surprisingly, the largest growth market here is the consultants. These are some of the things that they do. And I'm happy, since I'm running out of time, to go ahead and email this presentation afterwards, but I'm going to flip through here. The scariest thing to me is you've got everybody in on this, not just Exxons of the world, not just the car companies. You've got the World Bank, that's an IMF. IMF's all in. That's Goldman Sachs is in, Morgan Stanley, all pushing climate change. UBS, which is very important because they're the ones that also provide money to industries like coal, and if you can see where their interests lie, it's not in there. These are showing the green bond issuances based on type there. We got corporate banks, World Bank, et cetera. And so on the sustainable movement side or climate change side, you got the UN, the European unions, plenty of people still left in the federal government, states like Washington State, some of the largest financial institutions, largest energy companies, obviously this list of corporations that are all in, and then you've got President Trump, independent energy producers, what's left of the coal industry, a handful of groups like us, and then the average American who doesn't want this stuff. So the real game, I believe, is actually a coup of sorts by large corporations working with like large businesses to drive an agenda that's not in the best interest of the American people or the world for the simple reason of profits and control. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague.